Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nocturnal Narratives Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from around the world. So without further ado, let's begin the story. You know that feeling when your life is held together by a few frayed threads and you're praying they don't snap all at once? That was me. My name's Melanie, and last fall everything was crumbling. Rent was late again. My car needed a new alternator. My boss kept forgetting to schedule me for shifts. And to top it off, I'd just found out the guy I'd been seeing for 5 months had a girlfriend the whole time, one who'd just moved in with him. So when I got the email about my uncle's death and the inheritance he left me, it felt like a lifeline, a real one. Not a maybe next week will be better kind of hope, but an actual solid thing. He'd passed quietly in a VA hospital in Tennessee, a man I barely knew. His name was Gerald, my mother's half-brother. We weren't close. He was the kind of relative you saw in a single blurry photo tucked into an album. But apparently I was the last living heir, and his property, a cabin and some land near a dried-up creek in the hills, was now mine. It sounded like a dream, a rent-free place to stay for a few weeks, maybe even sell off if I got lucky. I pictured a rustic getaway, birdsong, peace. Somewhere I could reset. I had no idea what I was walking into. I packed my old Corolla with whatever would fit, told my landlord I was going out of town for family matters, and drove 16 hours straight to get to the place. It was late September, and the weather was still warm enough to roll the windows down. I remember the smell of pine as I wound my way up the narrow gravel road that led toward the cabin. No cell signal, no nearby gas stations. Just empty country, stretching out in every direction. I'd never felt so untethered in my life. It was terrifying and freeing. The cabin itself was exactly what I hoped it would be, at least on first glance. Nestled in a dip between two low ridges, it had a weathered porch, a slanted tin roof, and a little stone chimney that leaned like it was too tired to keep standing. The creek bed behind it was dry as bone, just a cracked trail of dirt and pale rock winding through the trees. But the woods felt alive in a quiet, watchful way. Not ominous. Not yet. More like the trees were curious about me. I felt welcomed. It's strange to say now, but that first night, I genuinely believed I'd found peace. Inside was dusty, but intact. A single room with a wood stove, a sagging couch, a small kitchenette, and a loft bed accessed by a narrow ladder. My uncle's belongings had already been boxed up by the estate folks, though a few things were left behind. A cracked photo frame, a rusty bird cage, and a single folding chair positioned by the window facing the woods. I remember that chair. It felt like it had a presence all its own, like someone had just stood up from it seconds before I walked in. I told myself that was just the nerves of arriving somewhere so unfamiliar. By the time I unpacked and set up my bedding, the sun had dipped behind the hills. The trees outside turned to shadowy silhouettes, and the temperature dropped sharply. I made tea, curled up on the couch with my coat still on, and flipped through the box of legal papers left on the table. It was mostly boring stuff, deeds, tax forms, a letter from the VA, but there was one envelope that stood out, handwritten, no return address, just my name, underlined twice in ink that had bled into the paper. Inside was a single page. Never answer the crows, no matter what they say. They know your name now. I read it 5 times. Then I laughed out loud. It felt like some kind of joke, maybe left behind by a caretaker, or one of those weird locals you hear about in old family stories. Still, I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I folded it back up, slid it under a book, and told myself I'd ask someone in town about it if I ever met anyone. That night, I slept better than I had in months. No city noise, no neighbors shouting through the walls, no glowing phone screen pulling at my attention, just darkness, cool air, and the quiet rustling of trees. It felt like I'd stepped out of my life and into something older, quieter. I didn't know then that the quiet wasn't a gift, it was a test. And the woods were waiting to see if I'd pass. The first full day at the cabin started slow. I woke to pale sunlight bleeding through the loft window, a soft breeze stirring the dust in quiet circles across the wooden floor. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I heard the creak of a branch outside, the kind that only comes from old trees swaying against one another. No traffic, no alarms, just the sound of nature waking up. I stretched, yawned, and smiled. Despite the weird letter, I felt okay. Better than okay. I had food, time, and space to breathe. 3 things I hadn't had all at once in over a year. By late morning, I'd started poking around the place with more focus. The legal documents from the night before gave me a good picture of what I was working with. About 4 acres of land, the cabin itself, and the dry creek bed that snaked down the property's backside and cut into the tree line. The tax record said the land hadn't been officially surveyed in decades, which meant I had no idea what really lay at the edges of it. I figured a good walk along the creek might help me map things out. Maybe find some old markers. If nothing else, it'd be something to do besides scroll through my camera roll or reread the same VA papers. Before I left, I scribbled a note to myself and pinned it near the door. Gone walking back by dark. Old habit from living with roommates. I wasn't scared, not yet. But there was something about the cabin that made me feel like I wasn't entirely alone. Not haunted exactly, just observed. Like if I left and didn't make it back, someone would need to know where to look. I laced up my boots, grabbed a bottle of water, and set off down the slope behind the cabin toward the creek. The walk started off beautifully. Warm sun on my back, the smell of earth and pine filling my lungs, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. The creek was completely dry, just as I'd seen from the porch, but the bed was wide and smooth, like it had been a real river once. I followed it deeper into the woods, occasionally stepping up to scan the ridge on either side. There were no fences, no clear lines between mine and not mine, just the occasional rusted marker or stone pile that might have meant something once. About 20 minutes in, I came across a strange arrangement of rocks. 3 stacked piles in a row, each one perfectly balanced, despite the wind that had picked up. They looked like cairns, but not ones you'd find on a trail. These were older, more brittle, covered in moss and sap streaks. One had what looked like a crow feather stuck into the top, wedged between 2 stones. I hesitated. Thought about taking a photo, but something in me said no. Not fear, exactly. Just a deep, gut-level instinct not to disturb it. I kept walking. The farther I went, the quieter it got. And not just the usual forest quiet, deep quiet. Even the wind seemed to vanish as I moved. At one point I stopped and realized I couldn't hear anything. No rustling leaves, no insects, no birds. I clapped my hands just to make a noise. It echoed weirdly, like it got swallowed up before it bounced back. That's when I felt the shift, a sense that something had noticed me. Not seen me exactly, but marked me. I turned back. I hadn't planned to be gone long, and now the light was slanting across the trees in that unmistakable late-day way. I walked faster than I'd planned, not quite running, but with a tightness in my chest that didn't let up until I saw the roof of the cabin between the trees. When I stepped back onto the porch, I exhaled hard, like I'd been holding my breath the whole time. The note I'd left by the door was gone. Just gone. I checked the porch, the floor, even the space beneath the mat. Nothing, I told myself. The breeze had carried it off. That I'd been careless. But the thumbtack I'd used to hold it in place, it was still stuck to the frame, right where I'd left it. The note had been pulled out deliberately. Removed. That was the first moment. I felt real fear. Small, but real. That night, as I boiled pasta over the propane burner and sat in the folding chair by the window, I thought I heard something. Faint at first. A sound I couldn't quite place. Like murmuring. No, like singing. Not a melody I recognized, but something repetitive, soft, lilting. It came from the direction of the creek. I stood up, pressed my ear to the screen, and held my breath. But the sound was gone, just wind and trees again. I didn't sleep well that night, not because of noise or nightmares, but because the silence felt heavier than before, like something was outside waiting politely, just past the edge of where the porch light could reach. The next morning, I woke up stiff and sore, my neck aching from how I'd twisted on the loft mattress in the middle of the night. I must have woken up 4 or 5 times, convinced I'd heard footsteps on the porch. Each time I looked out the wide window, though, there was nothing, just the same patch of dry earth, the outline of the trees, and the creek bed beyond. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been standing just out of view, watching, waiting. I got dressed quickly and made coffee even faster, trying to ground myself with routine. Sip, sit, breathe. Once the sun was fully up, I went outside and walked the perimeter of the cabin. I didn't expect to find anything, but near the steps, right where the porch met the dirt, I saw a track. Not a footprint, not exactly. It looked like a bird's, 3 forward-facing claws wide, with a curved rear talon. But it was huge. Bigger than any crow or hawk. Deep, too, like it had been pressed down with weight. My breath caught, and I crouched, trying to measure it. Against my hand, the span was wider than my palm. I told myself maybe it was a turkey, a big one. That sounded better than the alternative, something I couldn't explain. I stayed close to the cabin that day, cleaned out the cabinets, swept the floors, sorted through the few belongings my uncle had left behind. Most of it was junk, old, pocket knives, crumpled receipts, tangled fishing line, broken radios. But one item stuck with me, a notebook tucked behind the wood stove, its cover warped with heat and soot. Inside, the pages were filled with my uncle's handwriting. Not journal entries exactly, more like short, clipped observations, notes to himself. Warnings. Don't leave food outside. Keep the window covered at night. And then, written over and over again on the back half of the book, they don't like when you speak their name. No explanation. No name given. The longer I stayed in the cabin, the more I noticed things didn't behave the way they should. The wind didn't always match the movement of the trees. Shadows moved slower than the objects casting them. On my second day, I noticed the birdcage by the window, empty when I arrived, had been moved 2 inches to the left. I hadn't touched it. No reason to. I tested the floor, thinking maybe the boards were uneven, but it was perfectly flat. I stared at it for a long time before putting a coin on top, just to see if it shifted again. Later that afternoon, I ventured back toward the creek. Not far, just to the edge of the property where the trees started to thicken. I brought the notebook with me, flipping through the entries as I walked. One passage caught my eye. If you see the standing stone, don't walk past it. Don't look behind it. I paused, heart thumping. I hadn't seen any stone like that, but I hadn't really looked either. I snapped the book shut and turned around. No more exploring that day. That evening, I made a small fire in the pit out back. The sun dipped low, and the hills turned gold, then grey. I sat outside longer than I meant to, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. But then the crows came. First one, then two, then five, black specks against the dusky sky, landing on the skeletal branches near the creek. They didn't caw or flap, they just sat there, completely still, watching. I tossed a stick toward them without thinking, not to hit them, just to make them fly off. None of them moved. I went back inside and closed the door. As I washed, up in the little enamel sink, I heard it again. That low, melodic hum. Not singing exactly, but something close. It came from outside, near the trees. Soft and strange, like a lullaby in a language I didn't recognize. I shut off the faucet and stood frozen, trying to pinpoint the direction. Then, clear as day, a voice rose above the hum. A woman's voice, familiar, warm. She said my name, once, just once. Melanie, like a mother calling a child to come inside before dark. I ran to the window and looked out, but the yard was empty. The crows were gone. I didn't sleep that night either. By the third day, something in the air had shifted. I didn't realize it at first. It crept in slowly like fog in the hollows. I went through the motions of a normal morning, boiling water, scribbling thoughts into a notebook, checking around the cabin like I was keeping inventory. But every task felt a little harder. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt weighted, like it was pressing against the walls. Even the light filtering through the trees had changed, less golden, more grey-green, like it was passing through dirty glass. That's when I started keeping my boots on, even inside. The coin I'd left on the birdcage had fallen. Not off, the top, through the bars. It didn't make sense. The cage was fully enclosed, the wire tight. There was no way for it to just slip inside. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers. It felt warm, though the cabin was cold. I put it in my pocket and turned the cage toward the window again, hoping to shake off the crawling feeling that was starting to spread across my scalp. That afternoon, I tried hiking the same creek path I'd taken before. I needed the air, needed to feel like I was in control of something. But the woods had changed. I don't mean the trees looked different. I mean the path itself had changed. The landmarks I remembered, the 3 rock cairns, the bent oak branch, the little hollow where moss grew thick, none of it was there. Or rather, it had been replaced. New clearings, new trees. At one point I found myself standing in a shallow dip, surrounded by birches that hadn't been there 2 days before. They all leaned inward slightly, as if bending to whisper. I turned around and went straight back to the cabin. That night I locked the door and slid the bolt, though I doubted it would matter. I even pushed the couch in front of it for good measure. I lit candles, set out my pocket knife, and turned the notebook to a fresh page, thinking I might write it all out, try to make sense of it, but my hands were shaking. I stared at the blank paper for what felt like an hour before finally managing to write 2 words, "They know." I didn't remember writing it. The words were scrawled in a different rhythm than my own, heavier. I put the pen down and stepped away. That's when the knocking started. Not on the door, not on the windows, on the roof. Slow, deliberate, like fingers tapping wood. 3 taps. Silence. Then again, 3 tap. I held my breath, listening. I didn't dare move, didn't speak. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the sound, but the tapping kept going, steady as a clock. Eventually it stopped. I don't know how long I waited after that, 10 minutes, maybe more, before I stood up and moved toward the window. Out near the creek, just beyond the edge of the firelight, a figure was standing. Not moving, not shifting its weight, just standing. I couldn't see details, not in the shadows, but I could feel its focus on the cabin, like it knew exactly where I was. I backed away slowly, heart in my throat, and crouched behind the wood stove. I stayed there until dawn. When light finally broke through the trees, I dared to look out again. The figure was gone, but where it had stood, there were fresh tracks, those same bird-like claw prints leading toward the dry creek and then vanishing completely. I didn't follow them, I didn't take pictures, I just closed the curtain and sat back down, trying to breathe. That evening, I found feathers on the porch, 4 of them, laid out in a perfect line pointing toward the door. One of them was still warm. I swept them off the wood with a broom, but I didn't throw them away. I don't know why. I just placed them in the birdcage and shut the door. That night I heard my mother's voice, clear, strong, unmistakable. She's been dead 5 years, but I heard her say my name from the trees, the same way she used to when I was playing outside too long, stern but soft, like she was warning me, telling me to come home. I stayed inside. I didn't open the door. It started with the lights, not the cabin lights. I didn't have any electricity out there, but something outside, something that flickered just beyond the trees, moving slowly between the branches like a lantern being carried at a low swing. I first noticed it around 10 p.m. after I'd tried and failed to read one of the paperbacks I'd brought. The words wouldn't stay on the page, and the shadows from the candlelight kept creeping across the margins. I finally gave up and stood by the window, needing air more than light. And that's when I saw it. The light. Pale yellow. Soft. It pulsed, not steady like a flashlight, but rhythmic like breathing. At first, I thought it was a trick of the eyes. Maybe moonlight catching on moving branches, or someone's distant porch light half a mile away. But then it moved again, side to side, closer. I stood frozen at the window, watching it float just above the ground through the trees, slow and deliberate, like it was looking for something, or someone. And then it stopped, dead still, right at the edge of the clearing. I didn't go outside. I couldn't. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. But I didn't look away either. I just stood there, hand braced on the sill, and stared. The light didn't waver, it just sat there in the dark. And then, without warning, it went out. Not faded, snapped off, like someone flipped a switch. That was worse than anything. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like the forest had been holding its breath too, and was now waiting for mine. I backed away from the window, heart racing, and sat on the floor by the stove. My skin prickled like cold static, and every shadow in the room felt wrong. I told myself it was probably someone from town. Maybe a night hunter, a lost hiker. But I didn't believe that, not really. Especially when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps, not at the door this time, but from inside the walls. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I just sat there, trying to breathe, as something dragged its fingers or claws across the back panel of the cabin. When morning came, everything looked normal, but I knew it wasn't. I stepped outside to find that someone, or something, had placed small stones in a circle around the base of the cabin, 12 of them, all identical in size, each with a crude mark scratched into its surface, not symbols, letters, and not just any letters, my initials, repeated in sloppy loops, MD, 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 over and over. I stood in the center of that ring and tried to convince myself it was a prank, a hallucination. But my gut said otherwise. Later that day, I walked down to the creek again, needing to feel in control. I told myself if I could just see the boundaries of the land again, see something real, I'd feel better. I made it about 200 yards before I found it, the stone, the one mentioned in the notebook. It stood upright in the middle of the dry creek bed, slick with moss, grey and narrow like a tombstone. I hadn't seen it before, but now it was unmistakable. It looked carved, though weather-worn, like it had been there longer than anything else in that forest. I didn't get too close. I remembered what the journal said, don't look behind it. But still, I stepped close enough to see the back curve of it, just to be sure. And that's when I heard the singing again. Only this time, it was right, beside me. A soft, crooning melody that made my skin crawl. I spun around and the woods were empty. The stone stood unmoved. But something behind it, something I couldn't see, breathed. I didn't stay to investigate. I ran straight up the path back to the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me. That night I found claw marks on the bird cage, deep gouges in the metal, right where the feathers had been resting. The feathers were gone. So was the coin. In their place was a smooth stone, not carved, not marked, just perfectly oval, resting in the center of the cage like an offering or a trade. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window with the knife across my lap, listening to the wind carry my name through the trees. By day 6, the air itself felt different, heavier, like the woods had shifted into a different season without warning. Cold mornings that smelled like frost, even though the calendar still said late September. I started hearing things during the daytime now, cracks of branches behind me when I walked the ridge, whispers that stopped the moment I turned around. I hadn't seen a single animal in 2 days. No birds, no squirrels, not even insects buzzing in the leaves. The land around Crowsong Creek had gone still, like it was holding its breath. Or mourning. I woke up one morning to find something nailed to the door. A strip of cloth, dark and stiff with dried blood. Not fresh, but not old either. It was tied into a knot at the top, with a crow feather threaded through it like a tassel. I didn't touch it. I stood staring at it for a full 5 minutes before I slid the door closed again and locked it. Then I pushed the couch back against the frame. Whatever message had been left, I'd received it. Inside the cabin, I started hearing things from the walls, not scratching anymore, whispering. Low, dry voices like someone was speaking through layers of insulation. I couldn't make out the words at first. But then, late one night, I pressed my ear to the wall near the bed and heard it clear as day. It's yours now. The voice was neither male nor female. It was flat, like an echo that had long outlived its source. That same night, the window cracked. Not shattered, just one long fracture from corner to corner, like the glass had tried to scream and split instead. I tried to call someone, anyone, but there was no service, and the radio I'd found among my uncle's junk gave nothing but static. At one point, I climbed the ridge hoping for signal, but every time I turned on my phone, it powered off again. The battery stayed stuck at 66%, not 65, not 67, just stuck. like something was holding it in place. I began writing everything, down on paper, times, dates, what I saw, what I heard. But one morning, the pages were torn out, not missing, just shredded, placed back into the notebook like confetti. No one else had been inside. Then came the carvings. I found them on the trees by the creek, on the back of the birdcage, even under the porch steps. Thin, twisting symbols that looked almost avian, loops, beaks, wings, but with edges that didn't match any language. I stopped trying to make sense of them after the third day. It only gave me headaches. The shapes moved when I looked too long, like they were squirming just beneath the bark. I packed my bag that night. I didn't care if the car was low on gas or if I had to hike 10 miles to find help. I just knew I couldn't sleep there one more night. I set my alarm for dawn and laid fully clothed on the couch with a knife across my chest. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a noise from the porch, slow scraping steps. Something heavy dragging its weight across the planks. Then a voice. Not outside, the window. Inside the room. Just behind me, where the shadows gathered deepest. It said, "Melanie, we're ready now." I didn't turn around. I didn't speak. I just stared at the wall and waited for it to leave. I must have passed out from fear, because when I opened my eyes again, it was light out and everything was still. I sprang to my feet and grabbed my pack, but the front door was wide open, not kicked, not damaged, just open, like whatever had come in had let itself out again. Outside, the path to the road was gone. In its place was a new trail, one I didn't recognize, marked by more of those stacked stones and feathers. I followed it for half a mile before turning back. The cabin was no longer visible from where I stood. It had vanished behind a thick curtain of trees that hadn't been there the day before. I panicked, ran in the direction I thought was home, and eventually stumbled into the clearing again. The cabin was waiting, the door still open, and on the step sat my pack, right where I'd left it, like it had never moved. That night, I found a note pinned to the inside of the window, written in a hand I didn't recognize. It read, "You are home. Don't leave again. The crows remember." Below, it was a long scratch in the wood, deep and splintered, shaped like a beak pressed into the grain. I wish I could tell you I came up with some clever plan, that I fought back, found a secret trail, or called for help and someone answered. But the truth is, by that final morning, I was broken, not just scared, changed. My sense of time had unraveled. I couldn't tell how many days had passed or if I'd slept at all. The walls of the cabin felt too close. The trees outside looked wrong, taller than they had any right to be, their bark slick like wet feathers. I knew if I stayed even one more night, I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't even try. I'd forget why I ever wanted to. So I ran, no bag, no gear. I left everything, wallet, phone, food, on the floor, and sprinted barefoot out the door, like something had lit a fire under my ribs. I didn't follow a path. There wasn't one. I just picked a direction and went, crashing through brush, slipping down loose slopes, clawing my way over roots and rocks. My legs bled, my lungs burned. I didn't care. I didn't look back. I knew better than that by then. Whatever followed didn't need to be seen. It was always there, humming, waiting. At some point, the trees opened up and I burst out onto a gravel road. My legs gave out and I collapsed, sobbing and gasping, too exhausted to even notice the car that pulled up behind me. A park ranger found me there, mud-smeared, barefoot, and mumbling something about crows and voices and feathers in the walls. They took me to a hospital in Johnson City. I stayed under observation for 2 nights while they ran every test they could think of. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to sound shaken, but sane. I told them I'd been alone too long, that the isolation got to me. They nodded like they'd heard it all before. But when I asked if someone could go retrieve my things, from the cabin, just the legal papers and my ID, they hesitated, said they couldn't find the place, that the parcel of land I'd described had no cabin, no structure at all, just a dry creek bed and dense forest, no records, no trailhead, nothing. The GPS coordinates I had didn't lead anywhere. They said the map must have been wrong or the land reassigned.
I knew they were lying. Or worse, they didn't know what they were talking about, because something had taken the cabin, like it took everything else. I moved back to the city after that, started crashing on couches, then finally got a tiny
sublet in a building with bad plumbing and worse neighbors. But at least I could hear them through the walls. At least I wasn't alone. I kept the notebook my uncle had left, or what was left of it. The last few pages are blank, except for a single sentence written in the bottom corner of the final page. It stays quiet when you don't answer. I read it every night before I sleep, like a warning or a prayer. But here's the part. I've never told anyone, not the doctors, not the ranger, not even the friend who let me sleep on her couch for a month after I got back. A week after I left the woods, I started hearing birds outside my window every morning, same time, same
song. Always 3 calls followed by silence.
And on the 7th day, I found a feather. Long, black, placed neatly on my doorstep. The next week, another. Always one more than the week before. Always clean. Always placed. I've tried to ignore it. I've changed apartments, changed cities. Once I even stayed in a hotel for 2 months just to see if it would stop. But the feathers always return. Never accompanied by sound. Never with a message. Just a reminder. A token. A presence. I haven't seen the figure again, not clearly. But sometimes at night I hear singing. Just outside my window. That low, crooning hum that settles behind your ears and sinks into your bones. It never grows louder. It never comes inside. But
it never fades. I know what it wants. It wants me to remember, to keep the song going, and to never, ever answer back.
I know how ridiculous this sounds, so go ahead and roll your eyes, but I swear to you this happened. Every word. My name's Rob, and my family hunts. Not for sport exactly, not the way most people think about it. It's more of a tradition. Generations of backcountry Idaho men teaching their kids to track, to clean, to respect the kill. My dad used to say, "With the woods don't lie, they don't pretend to be your friend, and they don't care if you're scared." He taught me to treat the forest like it was alive, but indifferent, like a giant sleeping dog you didn't want to step on. And honestly, I always did, until last fall when something out there stepped on us instead. There's a stretch of land my grandfather leased decades ago that sits about 20 miles off any marked road. No one else goes out there. It's not posted or anything, just too remote, too rough for most folks. We call it Timberneck. Just a long ridgeline of thick pine and scrub, a single thread creek, and a rickety old shack we use for base camp. It has no insulation, barely any roof, and we love it. Every November, me, my dad, my brother Cole, and Uncle Rick head up there for a 5-day hunt. No wives, no kids, no cell service. The only rule is, once you get up to the rope line, you don't go past it unless you're with someone, ever. Now the rope line isn't anything special. Just an old nylon cord strung from tree to tree, maybe a mile out from the shack. When I was a kid, I thought it was there to mark a property boundary. But when I asked my dad about it once, he just said, "That's where we stop." I pressed him on it again years later, and he got weirdly firm about it. Said he saw a cougar pass the line once. Said the ground over there wasn't right. Said we stay where we belong, and it stays where it belongs. That was good enough for us. Every hunt follows a rhythm. We hike in, drop our gear, get the fire going, and spend the first night drinking cheap whiskey and playing cards. Then it's up before dawn, pair off into two-man teams, and head out with walkies and day packs. We usually bring down at least one deer by day 3, sometimes 2. We quarter and pack it out together. Then it's back to cards and campfire lies. Same thing every year. Always. But last year was different. Last year, the first day felt off before we even got to the
shack. It started when Cole said he saw someone on the trail behind us, just a flash of movement through the trees.
He swore it looked like a man wearing a hood, standing still, half concealed behind a tree. But when we turned, there was no one. We thought he was messing with us. Cole's the jokester of the group, always full of crap. But this time, he looked pale, unsettled. He kept checking behind us the rest of the hike. The shack was as we left it, dusty, mouse-bitten, but still standing. One of the side beams had collapsed from snow weight, but the inside was dry and usable. We set our gear, took our traditional first beer picture, and got to work stacking wood. I remember feeling like we were being watched, even then, but chalked it up to Cole's nerves rubbing off on me. I don't scare easy, none of us do. But there was a weird energy, like the air was just too still. No birdsong, no crunch of critters' underbrush, just our boots, our voices, and the occasional crack of firewood. At night, we stayed close to the fire. Usually someone walks a bit out to smoke or take a leak in peace, but none of us wanted to stray more than 20 feet from the light. When Rick lit his cigar, the smoke rose in a perfectly straight line, no wind to disturb it. The woods were so silent that even the soft clink of bottle caps hitting the floor felt like thunder. It was Cole who said it first, real quiet, while we all sat staring into the flames. It feels like we're the ones being hunted. No one laughed. By the time we turned in, the unease had crept into everything. The way the fire flickered,
Wrong. The way shadows didn't seem to match the flames' movement. The way every single one of us pretended nothing was wrong just to keep the mood up.
we slept with our rifles beside us. I know how crazy that sounds, but out there, instincts take over, and every one of ours was screaming. The next morning came cold and clear. I woke to frost on the inside of the shack windows and the smell of burnt coffee, Uncle Rick's idea of breakfast. We layered up, checked the rifles, and split into our usual pairs, Dad and Rick, me and Cole. Before heading out, we all gathered around the fire pit, sipping bitter coffee from enamel mugs while Dad went over the boundaries. He did it every year, but this time his voice was sharper, his gaze tighter. "Rope line's still there," he said. "Nobody crosses it, not for a shot, not for curiosity. If you see something beyond it, you call it in, and you come back to camp." We all nodded. It wasn't up for debate. The rope itself was old, frayed in spots but still visible, stretching along a rough arc through the tree line about chest high. It looked like nothing special, just a sagging cord hung with faded orange flags and the occasional plastic reflector. But to us, it meant something. A line between ours and not ours. I'd grown up hearing about hunters getting lost past that point, or animals behaving wrong on the other side. One year, Rick found a deer carcass on the rope itself, split, clean down the middle, no footprints, no blood trail. After that, we started marking the days with notches on a nearby tree. Like keeping count gave us some measure of control. We used walkie-talkies on a closed channel, just short-range stuff, with batteries that barely lasted a day. Each pair got one. The protocol was simple: check in at noon, again at dusk, then meet back at the shack. If someone didn't check in, we all regrouped and went looking. This wasn't about being dramatic, it was survival. Timberneck could chew you up fast if you got careless. Over the years, we developed a shorthand code over the radio. Yellowbird meant animal tracks. Rustline meant weather trouble. And Black Hollow was the emergency call, code for come now, don't ask questions. We never had to use it, not until this year. Cole and I took the Northwest Ridge. It was my favorite route, quiet, easy to track, and usually good for spotting mule deer. We moved slow, careful not to crunch the frost underfoot more than we had to. The light came in thin shafts between the trees, cold and white. I remember thinking how too quiet it was again. No movement, no birds, not even squirrels darting up the trees. At one point, Cole leaned close and whispered, "It's like the woods are empty, but still watching." I wanted to tell him to shut up, but I couldn't bring myself to say it, because I'd been thinking the same thing. Around noon, we checked in. Both pairs confirmed no kills, no sightings. Dad's voice over the radio sounded tight, like he hadn't slept. "Stick to the zone," he said. "If you see anything past the line, you leave it alone." We agreed and kept walking the loop. That's when Cole saw it. A line of clothes. About 30 yards off the trail, barely visible between the trees. At first, I thought it was trash. But when we got closer, we realized it was something else entirely. Old clothing, shirts, jackets, pants, strung along a thick nylon rope, stretched between two trees like a makeshift clothesline. But none of it made sense. The clothes were rotted, stiff with age, some torn straight through like they'd been shredded. And each piece had been carefully knotted to the rope with twine. There were at least 20 pieces, maybe more. But the rope didn't stop. It continued deeper into the woods, directly past the rope line. I remember standing there, staring, feeling something sink in my gut. It wasn't just the eeriness of the setup. It was how deliberate it all was. Someone had done this with care, with intention, and the forest around it felt heavier somehow, like the air itself was thicker near that line. We called it in, told Dad what we'd found. There was a long pause on the radio before he answered. "Come back, don't touch anything." That was all he said. No jokes, no questions, just come back. We backtracked in silence, and I couldn't help glancing back at the line. The rope had disappeared behind the trees, but I could still picture it perfectly. How each piece of clothing faced the same way, how some of the sleeves reached out like arms in mid-motion. When we made it back to camp, Dad was already standing. At the edge of the clearing, rifle slung across his chest, eyes locked on the tree line like he expected something to step out. "Did you touch it?" he asked. We shook our heads. "Did it see you?" I didn't know how to answer that. Didn't know what he meant. But the way he looked at us, like a man trying to measure if the door was already open, told me he wasn't just being dramatic. Something about that rope line wasn't just a boundary, it was a warning. That evening, the fire felt less like comfort and more like a ward. We huddled close, shoulders tight, eyes flicking toward the black gaps between trees. No one said much. Uncle Rick poured drinks without his usual smart-ass remarks, and Dad sat with the butt of his rifle resting on his knee, just staring into the flames. Every few minutes he'd glance at the walkie beside him, like he expected it to go off. Cole tried to break the tension with a dumb joke about ghost laundry services, but it fell flat. No one laughed. After a long pause, Dad finally spoke. "That rope," he said, voice low. "We don't follow it. We don't look for the end. It's there to turn us back." When we asked who put it there, he just shook his head. Someone who made it back. That was the end of it. The next morning, we split up again. The plan was to sweep westward, away from the rope line, and see if we could spot any fresh sign. The game camera we'd strapped to a tree the day before had nothing but 3 blurry frames of static. No wind, no motion, just interference, like the whole world had blinked out for a second. It wasn't malfunctioning, the batteries were fresh, and we'd tested it before setting it. Still, we told ourselves it was busted. Easier to explain it that way. Cole and I stuck to our loop. We were quieter this time, more careful. No dumb jokes, no wandering. We stopped every so often to scan the trees, not just for deer, but for anything. I remember seeing a patch of disturbed leaves at one point, like something heavy had passed through, dragging along the ground. No prints, no blood. Just a weird ripple in the landscape, like the forest had been bent and then snapped back into place. When I pointed it out, Cole just nodded. Neither of us said the obvious. At noon, we radioed in. Everyone was fine, no sightings, no shots, but Dad sounded more on edge than before. "Don't stay out too late," he said. "Sun goes down faster in these parts." He was right. Around 3:30, the light started thinning. Not the usual golden
hour glow. This was sharper, grayer, like the sky was about to cave in.
We turned back early, moving fast but quiet, rifles lowered but ready. The trees felt tighter somehow, the spaces between them smaller. I kept checking behind us without knowing why. When we got to the shack, Rick was already there, pacing. He didn't say a word, just gestured at the fire pit. Someone had rearranged the stones, moved them into a perfect circle, wider than before, with the ashes pushed neatly to the center. It wasn't wind, wasn't animals, it was too precise. We didn't say anything for a long time, just stood around it, unsure of whether to rebuild the fire or leave it cold. Eventually, we lit it anyway. No one wanted to sleep without that light.
As we sat down, Rick finally broke the silence. "Saw something," he said, "on the ridge." He didn't elaborate, and we didn't press him.
We just sat there in the fire's glow, our rifles resting across our knees. I remember watching the flames and noticing how none of us looked at each other, like we were all trying not to be the first to crack. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that line of clothing stretching between trees. In my head, it went on forever, wrapping around trunks, winding deeper into the dark. I kept thinking about the rope, how it was frayed, aged, but still held. I wondered how long it had been there, who had put it up, what they had seen. Around 2 a.m. I sat up and went outside to piss. I stayed close to the shack, maybe 10 feet from the door. As I zipped up, I saw something at the edge of the tree line. Not movement, just shape. It was tall, too tall, standing just behind the first row of trees. It didn't glow, didn't move, just stood there as if it had always been. I froze, staring. I wanted to call out, but I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat. The shape didn't shift, didn't run. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't facing me, it was listening. Head tilted just slightly, arms hanging low, like it was waiting to hear something. I backed away slowly, never turning, never blinking, until I was inside the shack again. I didn't sleep that night either. By morning, the tension was sitting on all of us like wet wool. No one had slept. Not really. We sat around the cold fire pit, drinking bitter coffee in silence, avoiding eye contact. Even Cole, who usually couldn't shut up, barely said a word. He kept rubbing his hands together like he was trying to stay warm, even though we all had on double layers. I finally told them what I saw about the figure in the woods, how it just stood there like it was listening. No one laughed. No one said I was imagining things. Dad only nodded once, slow and grim. Then he said, "I think it's time we packed. I up." That's when Rick said it. "I don't think we can leave." He looked pale, shaken in a way I'd never seen before. He explained how he'd gone out early before sunrise, just to scout the edge of the eastern tree line. Said he wanted to be the first to see any movement. But when he tried to follow the main trail back to the road, it was gone. Not blocked, not hidden, just gone. The trees were all wrong. The terrain didn't match the landmarks we always used. Bent cedar, the old split rock, they weren't there anymore. Like the forest had changed its face. Of course, we didn't believe him at first, but when we went to check ourselves, we saw it too. The trail we'd come in on didn't match anything we remembered. Where there had been clear markers and familiar rock outcroppings, now there was just dense woods. Every path we tried led
Us in a circle. We marked trees with bright tape, scratched X's into trunks, left broken branches as signs, and somehow we kept passing the same spots again and again. At one point, Cole cursed and kicked a rock marker we'd made, only to find
it sitting in the exact same spot 10 minutes later, untouched. We regrouped at the shack, shaken and silent. Rick sat with his head in his hands. Cole kept scanning the woods through the shack window. Dad sat in the corner, rubbing his jaw the way he always did when he was thinking through something dangerous. "We're being moved," he said, finally. "Not lost, moved." The idea should have been insane, should have felt impossible, but none of us argued. It made too much sense. Trails don't disappear. Forests don't rearrange themselves, unless something wants them to. That evening, the rope line was closer. None of us had touched it, hadn't even gone near it. But when we walked the perimeter to check our supplies and gear, we saw the cord strung between the trees, now just 50 feet from camp. Same tattered clothes, same knotted twine, only now the rope sagged lower, and some of the fabric fluttered as if something had passed by moments earlier. Dad didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at it, knuckles white around his rifle. We stayed together that night.
all four of us inside the shack, doors locked, rifles ready. No one slept, not even a nap. We sat with the lantern burning, watching the door, the windows, the walls, and at some point during the night, the walkie crackled. Just a short burst of static, then silence, then a voice. It wasn't any of us. It wasn't on our channel, but it was our walkie. The voice was soft, like a whisper, fed through 100 miles of dead air.
It said one thing, not yours. Then it clicked off. We sat frozen. The only sound was the wind that had finally returned, rattling dry branches outside. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving just beyond the walls. They circled the shack, crunching leaves and snow, then paused by the door. No knock, no push, just waiting. After a long minute, they moved again, back into the woods. The silence returned like a door closing. That was when we all knew we weren't alone, hadn't been for days. By morning, the rope line had moved again. Now it ringed the shack entirely, like a noose pulled tight around us. The clothes still hung from it, but now some of them looked newer. One jacket, I swear, looked exactly like mine. Cole spotted a shirt he said he hadn't worn in years. We didn't want to look anymore. We stopped checking. We stayed close to the fire and tried not to speak. That was the day the rules broke down. The boundary wasn't to keep us from going out, it was to keep something from getting in. And now, it didn't seem to care anymore. I kept thinking there had to be a trick to it, a natural explanation. Maybe we'd gotten turned around, maybe our minds were just breaking down under the stress, the silence, the cold, the isolation. It could mess with your sense of space, your perception of time. That's what I told myself as I stared at the rope surrounding our camp. I told myself those weren't our clothes hanging there, that the jackets and shirts just looked similar. I told myself we'd find the trail tomorrow, that this was all temporary. But deep down, I knew, we all did. Whatever had found us out here, whatever had moved the trail and pulled the rope tighter each night, it wasn't playing games, it wasn't trying to scare us, it was trying to own us. That morning, we tried one last time to get out. All four of us, full packs, rifles, bright trail markers, everything. We picked a direction and went in a straight line, cutting trees to mark the path every 50 yards. We walked for hours, no rest, no food, just the sound of boots crunching through frost and the occasional static blip from the walkie. And then we saw it, the rope. The same line of knotted clothes sagging between the same two trees. I remember stopping and just laughing. Not because it was funny, but because there was nothing else to do. The forest wasn't letting us out. That was the moment it hit me. The rope didn't just move closer every night, it was feeding off
Us. Tracking our minds, our memories, our gear. Every time we noticed something familiar, an item we thought we lost, a coat we hadn't seen in years, it was there, dangling from the line.
The forest was mirroring us, studying us, like it was building a model of who we were from the pieces we left behind. It didn't want us to go, it wanted to keep adding to the collection. Back at the shack, Cole had a breakdown. He kept pacing,
Muttering about seeing someone in the trees. Not something, someone. A woman in a hood, he said. Pale face.
mouth open like she was screaming but no sound. Every time he blinked, she was closer. He kept shaking his head, pressing his fingers into his temples. "She's not blinking," he whispered. "She's just watching, like she's waiting for me to blink first." We tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop. We had to tie him to one of the beams that night to keep him from running into the woods. That was when the walkie came on again. Same static, same whisper. But this time it said 3 words. Let him go. Rick yanked the batteries out of the unit and threw it into the fire. The plastic hissed and bubbled, but the silence that followed wasn't relief. It was pressure, like a lung holding air, like something waiting for us to make a choice. We kept Cole tied. We had no idea what was out there, what might happen if he left camp. But that night, while we sat inside, huddled around the last scraps of firewood, the rope moved again. We didn't see it happen. We just woke up and it was there, inside the shack. A single piece of it, threaded through a crack in the wall, draped over the cot, and tied to it one of Dad's old hunting tags, the kind we used to clip to deer quarters. It had my name on it. That was when I knew this thing wasn't hunting us, it was replacing us. I don't know how, I don't know why, but the forest had decided that we belonged to it now. And it was taking pieces of us, memories, voices, faces, and feeding them into whatever lived past the rope line. The more we resisted, the more it knew us. The more we tried to understand it, the more it used that knowledge to pull us in. Dad didn't say a word the rest of that day. He just sat with his rifle across his lap, watching the tree line like he was waiting for someone he knew. Rick started carving symbols into the doorway. Things he remembered from his grandfather, old hunter marks meant to keep spirits out. Cole stopped talking altogether, just sat in the corner with his eyes closed.
I didn't know what to do, none of us did. But we were past the point of strategy, past the point of escape. The only thing left was the waiting. It started with the wind, the kind that comes out of nowhere and doesn't sound right. Too
Sharp, too focused, like it's whispering through the trees instead of brushing against them. That night, it howled just after midnight, rattling the shack walls and making the roof groan like something was walking across it. We'd boarded up the windows earlier that day, but now the walls themselves felt thinner, as if the forest was leaning closer, listening harder. I sat with my back to the cot, rifle across my knees, and kept my eyes fixed on the door. I could hear Rick breathing slow and measured near the fire pit, and Cole's raspy whisper from the corner. "It's moving again, it's moving again." He kept saying it like a prayer or a curse. Then we heard it. Footsteps, not like before. This wasn't a quiet stalk, this was deliberate. Stomping, cracking, dragging steps like someone dragging a shovel or a wet sack of meat behind them. They circled the cabin once, then again, slower each time. We didn't move. No one spoke. And then, for the first time, we heard a voice. Not on the walkie, not from outside, from inside the shack, right behind Cole. It whispered his name, not a scream, not a hiss, just a slow, almost gentle Cole, so soft it made my stomach turn. I turned my head just in time to see him look up, his eyes wide, mouth open, frozen, and then he bolted. He shot to his feet, kicked over the lantern, and ran for the door, screaming. We tried to stop him, but he was already gone, tearing through the trees, his boots slapping the frozen ground. Dad yelled after him, but the words died in his throat. We all knew. If we followed him, we'd never come back. Rick grabbed the second lantern, and we waited. 15 minutes, 30, an hour, no sound, no footsteps, no screaming, nothing. Then we saw movement through the slats of the boarded window, someone walking toward the shack. At first, I thought it was Cole. Same build, same gait, but then it stopped, just outside the firelight, not moving, just standing there. I whispered
his name, nothing. Rick raised the lantern slowly, and that's when we saw the face. It wasn't Cole, not anymore.
The body looked like him, yes, but the face was wrong, pale, stretched, and where the eyes should have been, there were just dark hollows, like something had scooped them out and filled the space with ash. The thing turned its head, slow and deliberate, like a puppet on strings. Then it smiled, not wide, just enough to show that it knew we were watching. Rick raised his rifle, but Dad grabbed his arm and shook his head. "Don't shoot it," he said. "That's not for us to kill." We backed away from the window. By the time we looked again, it was gone. We didn't speak the rest of the night, not even a whisper. We just sat there, surrounded by the sounds of the forest breathing against our walls. The rope line was gone by morning. Just gone. No trace. No clothes, no twine. No trail. It was as if it had never existed. But the ground around the shack had changed, flattened in some places, like something heavy had been dragging itself through camp. All our gear was undisturbed, our packs, the food, the firewood. It was all exactly as we'd left it. But we didn't feel relief, we felt watched. We left that morning, without a word, no breakfast, no coffee, just packed our bags and started, walking. This time the trail was back exactly where it should have been. The markers were there, the terrain matched, the forest looked normal again. Birds even chirped in the distance, like they'd been waiting for a cue. It should have felt like freedom, but none of us believed it. We kept our rifles ready and didn't stop until we reached the truck. Even then, we loaded in silence, scanning the trees for any hint of movement. Only once we were 10 miles down the road did anyone speak. It was Rick, and all he said was, "Leave it behind." We never spoke about it again. Not really. Cole was never found. We filed a report. Search and rescue went out. They found boot prints that vanished into nothing and a tattered piece of twine knotted around a low-hanging branch. That was all. No body, no signs of a struggle. Just gone. The official story says he got lost. Hypothermia. Maybe a fall. But we knew better. We'd seen better. The forest took him and gave us something in return. Something that wore his shape just long, enough to send a message. It's been 11 months, almost a full year since Timberneck. I haven't been back. None of us have. We cancelled the lease on the land, packed up all the hunting gear, and stored it in Dad's shed. He hasn't touched his rifle since. Rick stopped coming around. We used to see each other once a week. Game night, beers, stories. But now it's down to the occasional text. "You holding up?" is the most either of us says. Sometimes I think about calling him just to talk it out, just to say it happened out loud. But I know what he'd say, "Leave it behind." And part of me is still trying. Dad's different now. He's quieter, slower, like something weighed him down and never lifted off. Sometimes he sits in the backyard just staring at the woods behind the property. I caught him once, talking under his breath. Not to himself, not in a crazy way, but like he was answering. When I asked him about it, he didn't deny it. He just said, "It's best to stay on good terms." I didn't push him. I didn't want to know what that meant. The dreams come and go. Sometimes it's the rope line, stretching endlessly through black trees with clothes flapping in a wind I can't feel. Sometimes it's Cole standing in the clearing, mouth open like he's screaming, but I never hear the sound. I wake up sweating, heart pounding, certain there's something standing in the corner of the room, watching. But by the time I turn,
On the light, there's nothing there. Not always, anyway. 3 nights ago, I found something outside my apartment door.
a piece of rope, frayed, old, coated in that same reddish sap that used to drip from the birch trees at Timberneck. It was tied in a tight, perfect loop, no note, no box, just sitting there like someone had placed it with care. I picked it up with gloved hands and dropped it in the dumpster across the street. I didn't even want it in my building. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the walls sounded like footsteps outside my window. And then yesterday, someone left a shirt on my porch, folded, clean, familiar. I stared at it for a long time before realizing it was Cole's, a black thermal with a stitched tear near the collar that I remember from our last trip. I checked with his girlfriend. She confirmed she buried it in a memorial box last winter. She was sure of it. So how the hell did it end up here, folded on my welcome mat? That's when I knew this isn't over. It never really was. The rope.
Line might have vanished from the forest, but it didn't go away. It just found new ground, new ways in. Maybe it's following us. Maybe we brought it back by trying to leave.
I don't know what it wants or how long it'll wait, but I've started seeing shadows in the corners of my apartment that don't quite line up with the light. Sometimes the TV turns on with static at exactly 3:17 a.m. Every time it's the same message in the snow, not yours. I don't go outside after dark anymore. I've nailed shut my bedroom window. I keep salt lines across the doorway, like Rick used to talk about when he was drunk and half serious. I don't know if it helps. I don't think anything really can. because whatever we crossed out there, whatever lived just past the rope line, it crossed something too, a line between worlds or minds or whatever holds the balance between the wild and what watches from the dark. I think it's trying to remind me of one thing, something I tried to forget the second we left the woods. We never should have looked past the rope. We weren't supposed to see what was waiting. I should have walked away the moment I saw the ad. It was one of those vague, too good to be true listings posted late at night on a local outdoorsman forum. No company name, no logos, just a title that read, "Temporary groundskeeping help, high pay, remote setting." The body of the post said they needed someone for a short-term, off-grid job maintaining legacy property in protected woodland with the promise of $1,000 per day, cash. A 4-day assignment, room and board included. That was it. I clicked out of it at first. I'd seen enough scams to know how these things usually ended, but it stayed with me. Something about the wording, legacy property, protected. It didn't sound corporate. It sounded old, and more than that, I needed the money. I'd just been let go from a seasonal park ranger job, budget cuts, they said, and I was already 2 months behind on rent for my basement apartment. I'd pawned my decent camera, picked up 2 dishwashing shifts at a 24-hour diner, and sold my hiking gear just to keep gas in the tank. One more missed payment, and I'd be couch surfing again. So when the ad came back the next night, same title, word for word, I messaged the contact. A woman responded within the hour. Her name was Annette. No last name. She asked if I was accustomed to remote sites, manual labor, and silence. I said yes. She replied with coordinates, the job duration, Thursday to Sunday, and a single condition. Do not bring guests, no phones, we provide what you need. I told myself it was just a rich family's private cabin, maybe someone eccentric trying to preserve a slice of the past. Either way, it sounded easy. 4 days of chopping, wood, sweeping floors, cleaning up leaves for $4,000. That kind of money doesn't knock twice. Looking back though, the way she phrased it, we provide what you need, should have been the first red flag. Not what you'll need, or we'll have supplies ready. No, it sounded like they knew something.
I didn't. Like the job required more than just tools. I didn't even tell my roommate where I was going.
Just left a sticky note on the fridge that said, "Back Sunday, don't touch my last Red Bull," and headed north in my beat-up Subaru. The drive took me deep into the Catskills, then past the familiar campgrounds and trailheads into an area I'd never explored. The last 30 miles were all dirt roads, marked only by weathered US forestry signs, half swallowed by underbrush. By the time I reached the coordinates, the sun was already behind the hills. No cell signal, just a clearing at the end of a narrow path, and a single building with smoke rising from the chimney. It looked like something out of an old postcard, a hand-built log cabin with wide steps, tall shutters, and a woodpile stacked just so beside the door. Lights were on inside, soft yellow like candlelight. The air smelled like pine and something sweet, maybe cinnamon. It was strange, sure, but not sinister. Honestly, it felt welcoming. Homey. That was the trap. There was no one waiting outside, so I walked up the porch and knocked. The door wasn't locked. It creaked open a few inches and revealed a cozy interior, fireplace lit, lanterns flickering, a table set for dinner. 4 places, plates already served, hot food still steaming, and at the head of the table a card with my name written in delicate cursive. Eli. I should have turned around right then. Should have taken the silence as a warning, not a comfort. But instead I stood there on the threshold, trying to convince myself this was just a quirky employer's idea of hospitality. that the food had been set out by someone who'd just stepped away. I called out, "Hello, I'm Eli, the guy you would buy."
Hired? My voice didn't echo. It just died, like the room swallowed it whole. I stepped inside.
My boots made no sound on the floorboards. The air was warm, too warm for early spring. And though I hadn't eaten all day, I didn't touch the food. Something about the stillness felt arranged, like I wasn't walking into a cabin, I was walking into a scene. One that had been waiting for me. I found a note beside the card with my name. It read, "Rest tonight, start tomorrow. You'll know what to do." That was the second red flag. The idea that I'd know what to do without being told, that some part of me had already agreed to more than I understood. I wanted to leave, I really did, but I was tired, cold, hungry, and the money. God, that number echoed in my head like a lullaby. $4,000, 4 days, so I sat down in the chair with my name on it. I didn't eat. I just sat there, staring at the 3 other empty seats. And that's when I saw it. The dates on the place cards. Mine said March 9th. The others said March 8th, March 7th, March 6th, and their names had been crossed out. I woke up to the sound of wind, but the trees outside weren't moving. The window above the small cot was cracked open, and the chill coming through didn't match the fire still glowing softly in the hearth. I was alone. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no creaking of old timber, not even the hum of forest life that usually surrounds a place this deep in the woods. It felt like being inside a vacuum. The food from last night was gone. All the plates cleared, even the utensils had been washed and set back in their drawer. I hadn't heard anyone moving during the night, no footsteps, no doors opening. I checked every room, there were only 3, and found no signs of another person. No extra coats by the door, no fresh boots in the mudroom, just mine. I started to wonder if someone had been watching me sleep. There was a small clipboard on the kitchen table that hadn't been there the night before. A list of chores had been written in neat, blocky handwriting. Chop kindling, sweep porch, clear path to marker, do not enter the woods. That last part was underlined twice. I didn't know what marker meant, but I figured I'd find out soon enough. Maybe this was just some weird, rustic Airbnb gig, the kind where owners get off on guests pretending it's the 1800s. That didn't explain the pay or the formality, but it helped me avoid thinking too hard. Outside, the cabin sat like a fossil in the clearing, sun slicing through the mist that clung to the treetops. There were no tire tracks besides my own, no phone signal either, not even a blip. The path was easy enough to find, worn dirt between 2 rows of crooked stones that looked more natural than man-made. I started the chores feeling like a character, in a dream I couldn't wake up from. The strange thing was how clean everything already was. The porch barely needed sweeping. The woodpile was fully stocked. Even the trail had been mostly cleared, just a few fallen twigs here and there. It was as if someone had done all this hours before I woke up, but left the work for me anyway, just to see if I'd do it. About 50 yards down the path, I found it. The marker. A wooden post about waist high, standing alone at the edge of the clearing where the forest got thick and dark. Something was carved into the top, a circle with 3 lines running through it, like claw marks or maybe tree roots. I didn't recognize the symbol. The earth around it had been cleared into a perfect ring, not a single leaf out of place. There were no instructions about the marker, nothing in the journal or clipboard. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring at it, feeling that same pressure in my chest I'd felt the night before, like something was holding its breath. When I got back to the cabin, The fire had been restoked. The door I'd locked was now slightly ajar, and there was steam fogging the mirror in the bathroom, as if someone had just taken a hot shower. But I hadn't. No one else was supposed to be here. I checked every room again. Nothing. Still, the place didn't feel empty. It felt watched. Like whatever had been waiting was now starting to move. That night, dinner appeared again. Different. Food. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, even a glass of red wine. My name was still on the card at the head of the table. The others were gone. Not just removed, gone. I stared at the empty spots, trying to remember if I'd imagined the other.
Place settings, but I hadn't. I know what I saw. I sat down again. I didn't eat.
I just sat there until the fire died and the light outside turned to ink. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing. Just a soft shuffle across the roof, like something crawling, slow and heavy. It made its way to the far corner of the cabin, paused and then tapped. Once, twice, 3 times. By the 3rd morning, I had fully slipped into the rhythm of the place, but not because I felt settled. It was more like my brain had given up fighting how off everything felt. The clipboard still had tasks on it, neatly written in the same steady hand. Scrub front steps, check attic window, bring offering to marker. That last one froze me. There hadn't been anything about offerings before. Nothing in the previous day's list. I scanned the rest of the page, hoping for an explanation, but there was none. Just that line, bring an offering, no detail on what or why. I walked the entire cabin looking for clues. There was no pantry, but the fridge had been restocked again. Fresh fruit, jars of preserves, even a wrapped slice of lemon cake that I definitely hadn't seen before. My boots, damp from the night before, were now completely dry and lined, up perfectly beside the door. The axe, which I'd leaned against the shed, was polished and set across the chopping block, with the blade facing away from the woods. The only thing that wasn't pristine was the mirror in the hallway. It had fogged again, but there had been no steam, just 3 fingertip marks dragged slowly down the center. That's when I found the rules. Not a list exactly, more like observations jotted down on a torn sheet of legal paper tucked behind a loose plank in the corner bookshelf. The handwriting was messy and frantic, but I could still read it. Do not speak after dusk. Do not follow voices. Leave food.
At the marker. Never stay past the 4th night.
It looked like someone had written it quickly, maybe even under pressure. There were crossed out words, and in the margin, a single repeated phrase. They only come if you break the quiet. I felt a tightness in my chest, like the cabin itself had been holding something back, and the note was letting it out. I looked at the firewood I'd stacked earlier, each piece dry, even though it had rained during the night. I looked at the nails in the floorboards, freshly hammered down, no rust, no squeak. It dawned on me slowly that this place wasn't just old, it was being kept, maintained, maybe even repaired, but not by me. Later that afternoon, I made the offering. I didn't know what was expected, so I wrapped a small plate of food. From the fridge, a roll, some butter, a wedge of cheddar, and carried it out to the marker. The air felt denser there, like walking into a bubble of stillness. I placed the plate on a flat stone beside the post and stepped back. The second, my foot crossed the boundary back into the clearing. The bird song that had been missing all day returned at once, sharp, echoing, and way too loud, like something had flipped the sound back on. That night, the cabin locked itself. I hadn't touched the deadbolts or the sliding latches, but everyone was thrown shut by the time I checked before bed. The fire was already lit, the bed turned, down, Another meal waited on the table, this one hot to the touch, as if I'd just finished cooking it. My card was still there. The wine glass now had a faint lipstick mark on the rim. I stared at it, frozen, trying to remember if I'd touched it. I hadn't. I hadn't drunk a drop, I was sure of it. And then, just before I turned in for the
night, I saw it. A new name had appeared on the wall above the
burned into the wood. Not scratched, not painted. Burned. A first name only, Maya. The rest of the wall was clean. My name wasn't there yet. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't a job. It was a pattern. I woke up the next morning with the bitter taste of iron in my mouth and the distinct feeling that someone had been watching me sleep. Not a passing thought, not a bad dream, a knowing. The fire had gone out during the night, which was strange because it had been blazing when I turned in. My flashlight was drained. I know I hadn't used it. Even worse, my watch had stopped at 3:17 a.m. and I couldn't get it to tick again. It wasn't broken, it just stopped, like something had told it to. After I'd scrubbed the steps again and replaced a few roof shingles, more tasks that didn't need doing, I found a second note tucked beneath the doormat. This one wasn't written by Annette. The handwriting was jagged, erratic, like it had been scribbled in a hurry by someone using a shaking hand. It read, 3 before you, 2 stayed, 1 left a finger behind. Don't stay for the 4th night. Don't eat their food. Don't answer the door after midnight. No signature, no explanation, just that. I didn't know what scared me more, the contents of the note or the fact that someone had managed to leave it without me hearing a single thing. I walked the entire property twice. No tracks, no voices, just that same eerie pressure in the air, like the forest was watching, but didn't need eyes to do it. I left the note in my coat pocket and sat down on the porch steps trying to put the pieces together. I wasn't alone here. Someone else had been through this before, maybe more than one. That's when I noticed the carving. It was at the edge of the woodpile, low to the ground where it could be easily missed. Just a shallow etching in the bark of the thickest log. Day 4 is not yours. The letters were crude, uneven, like they'd been hacked in with a hunting knife. Not part of any task list, not decoration. A warning, plain and simple. And there were dozens of similar marks in the trees along the trail leading to the marker. Some names, some numbers, others just tally marks, like someone had been keeping count of something they couldn't bring themselves to say out loud. Inside, the cabin had changed again. The furniture had been rearranged, not dramatically, just enough to make me question if I was remembering things.
Wrong. The couch was angled slightly toward the window now. The rug had been turned 90 degrees.
One of the lanterns flickered like it was about to go out, even though it had a brand new battery. And then there was the mirror in the bathroom, no longer fogged, but now cracked, top to bottom, with a hairline fracture shaped almost perfectly, like a branch. I didn't touch it. I just stared at my reflection and saw myself blinking too slowly, like I'd been drugged. That evening, as I was putting another plate of food out at the marker, this time I didn't even question it. I
heard something behind me.
It wasn't footsteps, it was softer, stranger, like something dragging across moss-covered earth. I didn't turn around. I knew better by now, but I did look down at the offering and saw it had been taken. Not just nibbled, gone. Plate and
all. And in its place, a sprig of cedar, perfectly cut, tied with red thread. Back at the cabin, the card with my name had moved from the table to the nightstand beside the bed.
The handwriting was different now, smoother, more elegant. I picked it up with shaking hands and turned it over. On the back was a question in looping cursive. Would you stay if asked nicely? That night, something knocked on the door. Once, then again, then a third time. And I swear to you, the voice that followed wasn't human. It was too polite, too calm. Eli, it's time to join the others. Your place is still warm. I didn't sleep after that. I didn't even blink. I didn't open the door. Not that night. Not even when the voice came back, softer and sweeter, just before dawn. It whispered from the other side like it knew me, not just my name, but the way I breathed, the rhythm of my heartbeat, my hesitation when I considered the latch. It said, "Eli, we set the table for you. It's rude to make your guests wait." I sat there in the armchair by the fire, clutching the axe I hadn't used since the first day, and counted down the seconds until the sun began to rise. When the morning light broke through the fog and spilled across the cabin floor, the pressure lifted.
Not gone, just waiting. I took the chance to search the place top to bottom, not just surface level, but crawling into crawl spaces, tapping at the walls, lifting floorboards. That's when I found it, beneath the kitchen, behind a loose slat.
In the back wall, a small metal lockbox, the kind you'd keep old photos or private letters in. I popped it open with the flat end of the axe. Inside were 3 laminated ID cards. 3 different names, each with a photo, each labeled temporary custodian. Their job descriptions were vague: site security, legacy upkeep, archival recording. But it was the dates that made my mouth go dry. One card was from 1994, another from 2006, the last from 2015. None of the names matched the ones I'd seen carved into the wall, or the ones I thought I saw scratched into tree bark near the marker. But all 3 had one thing in common: no expiration date, just a start day, never an end. Beneath the cards was a stack of handwritten reports. Some were torn, others stained with what looked like ash or mold. The entries varied, but they all carried the same tone. Part log, part confession. Phrases like, "I don't know if they
Can read thoughts, but they know fear and don't eat the food."
It's how they see you." One entry, barely legible, read, "We're not caretakers, we're currency." I dropped the box and stepped back, heart thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears. That was when the floor creaked upstairs. Not a small shift. A footstep. I hadn't been up there since the first day. There was only a loft and a crawl space under the eaves. Nothing up there. Nothing that should be moving. Still, I climbed the stairs, axe in hand, one creaking step at a time. The upper room was cold, far colder than the rest of the house, and smelled faintly of cedar smoke and dirt. I swung the door open. Nothing. Just the bed, the trunks, the dusty shelves. Then I saw the closet. It was slightly ajar. Inside, hanging neatly, were 4 jackets, one for each custodian. All different sizes, different styles, like they'd been collected from different decades. On the floor beneath them, I saw 4 pairs of boots lined up, none of them mine. The one on the end was filled with dirt. And something else. A scrap of red thread tangled around a piece of yellowed bone, no bigger than a pinky finger. I bolted. I didn't stop to gather my things, didn't wait to see what came down the stairs behind me. I threw open the cabin door, expecting to be blinded by daylight, but it wasn't daylight anymore. It was dusk, and the table was set again. I tried to run, but the forest turned against me. The path that had been clear just hours earlier now twisted into dense brush and thorny walls, the kind of overgrowth that doesn't show up overnight. I fought my way through it anyway, clawing at branches, ripping my sleeves, pushing until I was breathless, but every direction circled me back to the cabin like I was caught in some kind of loop, the trees reshaping themselves around my panic. The clearing always reappeared, same as I'd left it, with the fire burning and that awful table waiting. It wasn't just the geography that had changed. The air had too. It felt heavier, like breathing through wet cloth, and the light had shifted into an unnatural golden hue that didn't belong to sunset or sunrise. Somewhere in the woods, I heard the sound of silverware clinking on china, the
scraping of chairs, the shifting of weight, but no laughter, no conversation.
just the quiet rhythm of something performing politeness without understanding what it meant. Back inside, I tore through drawers looking for the keys to the truck, but they were gone. So was my phone, which I'd kept powered off just in case. I searched for hours under the bed, in the stove, inside a hollow beam near the hearth, but it was like the cabin had absorbed them, like it had learned from the others what to take and when. I tried to break a window, but the glass wouldn't crack. I used the axe on the back door and left nothing but dents. Whatever this place was, it wanted me here, needed me here. I was the next piece in its setting. When night finally came, the knocking started again, only this time it didn't stop. It circled the cabin, a constant thump, thump, thump on the walls, the windows, the roof. No footsteps, just knocks. Steady, patient, like fingers tapping on glass from the other side. I shoved furniture against the doors, jammed knives into the windowsills, but I knew none of it mattered. It was all for show. Just a way to pretend I still had choices. Then the voice came back, but it didn't sound polite anymore. It sounded tired, like it had been doing this forever. "You've been rude, Eli. You left your plate untouched. You missed your cue. Don't make us bring the others." It didn't shout. It didn't growl. It just spoke like a disappointed host, and that somehow made it worse. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall, axe across my knees, shaking, and waited for something to happen. And something did. The fire went out in a blink. No smoke, no ember, just darkness. Then the cabin sighed. That's the only way I can describe it. The wood groaned, the ceiling shifted, and the floor beneath me seemed to settle, like the building itself was relaxing, like it finally had what it wanted. I felt a draft behind me and turned slowly toward the fireplace. The table had changed again, no longer set for one, but for 5. I saw the cards: Eli, Maya, Jordan, Claire, Anthony. I didn't know the other names, but they knew mine. The chairs scraped slowly out from under the table, one by one, moving without hands, waiting for us to sit. That was when I heard the stairs creak. Something was coming down, not fast, not heavy, just steady, like it knew exactly where I was and had all the time in the world to get there. I didn't wait for whatever was on those stairs to finish coming down. I bolted through the front door, ignoring the sting of
splinters as I slammed my shoulder against the frame hard enough to throw it open.
This time, the woods didn't twist. They opened, not in welcome, more like a trap that had been sprung, its jaws widening just enough to let something run. The cold air hit my lungs like knives, but I didn't care. I sprinted through the dark, barefoot, directionless, crashing through brambles and sliding across moss-slick roots. I must have run for miles, though it felt like minutes. The woods blurred together into one long tunnel of branches and fog until I collapsed near a stream that hadn't been there before. There was no sound, no insects, no wind, not even my own panting, but the cabin was gone. When I finally staggered back to a gravel road at sunrise, I flagged down a logging truck with a face so wild the driver almost didn't stop. I told him I'd gotten lost camping, left out the part about the place setting, left out the voices, left out the fact that I hadn't been invited, I'd been expected. I made it back to town 2 days later, barefoot, bruised and filthy. I called the number Annette had used. It didn't exist. The forum thread was gone. I tried to pull up the coordinates again, but the app wouldn't recognize them. The last text I had from her vanished while I was holding my phone. Like the whole thing had been a test, and failing to stay meant forfeiting the memory. Except, I remembered everything. I tried to forget. I really did. I moved out of state, changed my number, started over. But a few weeks ago, a package showed up at my new place. No return address. Inside was a place card. My name. Same handwriting, same curled edges, but this time it wasn't set for March 9th. It was blank. The bottom corner held only one line, written in dark red ink. Your seat is still warm.
I don't know how they found me. I don't know when they'll come. But I can't sleep near windows anymore. And I haven't eaten at a set table since. I think if I do, it'll count as a yes. That I'm ready to return. Because that...
Cabin doesn't need permission. It only needs a reason. And once it's set the table for you sooner or later, you'll come back and take your place. My name's Nate, and I guess you could say I've always been a loner. Not in a sad way, just I like the quiet. Always have. That's why I picked up hiking. I'm not the kind of guy who documents every mile or flexes the gear. I just like putting one foot in front of the other until the noise in my head gets drowned out by wind through the trees. So last October, I took some time off work and decided to solo hike a trail up in Maine's northern woods, something I'd dreamed about for years. I didn't expect the trip to end the way it did. Looking back, though, there were signs from the beginning. I'll skip the boring stuff like travel and packing, but I found a listing on an old hiking forum. A guy named Curtis had posted about a Forest Service shack near Birch Hollow, abandoned but still standing. Not technically legal to rent, he said, but a donation gets you the key. I should have known better, but I PayPal'd him $60, and 2 days later he mailed me a rusted key in an unmarked envelope. Just the key. No instructions, no address. Just a GPS pin and the words, "If you hear anything at night, stay inside." The hike-in was beautiful. Long, a bit grueling, but every leaf was glowing orange and red, and the air smelled like wood smoke and cold moss. I remember thinking how lucky I was that no one else was around, no traffic, no voices, no phones pinging, just that kind of silence that you only get far from everything. I didn't realize yet that silence can stretch too long, that it can feel wrong. When I reached the shack, I was pleasantly surprised. It looked like a ranger cabin from the 40s, shingled roof, stone foundation, a narrow chimney leaning slightly like it had gotten tired. One window was boarded up, and the door stuck when I tried it, but otherwise it was still holding up. The air inside smelled of old pine and dust. There was a cot, a cracked wood stove, a busted desk, and a rickety cabinet full of half-rotted maps and moth-eaten flannel. I dropped my gear, laid out my sleeping bag on the cot, and hung my jacket
on a rusted hook near the door. I even chuckled a little. Felt like a proper wilderness guy, you know.
I made a cup of instant ramen on my portable burner and sat on the front step as the sun dipped behind the black outlines of the birches. I remember thinking, this is it. This is peace. But that night, I noticed something strange. Not loud, not scary, just something missing. No night sounds, no bugs, no owls, no wind. Just an unnatural quiet that sat heavy in my chest, like the woods were holding their breath. At one point, I rustled a candy wrapper just to break it. That tiny crinkle echoed like a scream. I chalked it up to isolation, the kind of paranoia that sets in when you're alone too long. The next morning, I felt better. Brighter, I hiked. For a few miles, snapped some photos, cooked lunch near a frozen stream. I found deer tracks and a collapsed stone wall someone built decades ago, the kind of forgotten history I live for. When I got back to the shack that evening, I noticed my jacket was gone. The one I hung on the hook. I figured I must have knocked
it down and it got kicked under the cot, but it wasn't there. It wasn't anywhere. I searched every corner. Nothing. That was the first thing. A jacket. Easy to lose, right?
But the next night, my lantern, an old battery one I always carry, was missing from the desk. I hadn't taken it out with me. And in its place was a pile of birch bark. Cleanly cut squares of it, stacked neatly like paper. I should have been more freaked out. I wasn't, not yet. I thought maybe a local was messing with me. Some woodsman who didn't like trespassers. So I left a note outside that said, "Just passing through, no harm meant." I stuck it to the door with a twig and tried to sleep. That night I dreamed I was underground, trapped. The silence down there was so complete it was loud, like a pressure on my skin. I woke up gasping, sweating through my thermals. And even though I'd locked the shack door from the inside, it was open. Just slightly. The next morning brought a kind of still beauty that made it easy to forget the weirdness from the night before. A soft mist hung low over the trees, blurring the trunks of the birches into ghostly shapes that looked more peaceful than haunting. I stepped outside, breathed in the cold air, and reminded myself that paranoia and sleep deprivation were probably to blame. The missing jacket, the bark pile, the open door, none of it screamed danger. It all felt like something I could explain, even if those explanations were a little thin. I made some instant coffee with my little camping stove, sat on the wooden stoop of the cabin, and listened. The woods were still quiet, but the sun was out, and somehow that made everything feel a little more normal. The light filtered through the white bark and yellow leaves like stained glass. For a while, it was easy to believe I was just on a strange, beautiful solo retreat. I spent that day exploring the area more deliberately, using one of the old ranger maps I'd found in the cabinet inside. Most of them were water damaged and falling apart, but one still had legible trails marked in red pencil. The path led me around a shallow ravine, past a half-collapsed fire lookout tower, and to a clearing filled with birch stumps. They looked like they'd been cut clean, all in one straight line, facing the same way. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was old forestry work, maybe part of a fire break or boundary. Still, I found myself standing in that clearing for a while, feeling like I was being watched. No sounds again. Not even the wind. Just that thick quiet that had become familiar. But when I got back to the cabin, nothing was out of place. No missing gear, no strange signs. The note I had left the night before was still tucked by the door. That night I fell asleep faster than expected. The following day, I decided to document some of what I'd seen. Not because I thought anything unusual was going on, more just out of habit. I've always liked to keep journals on long hikes. I wrote about the trees, the weird silence, the cold that seemed to settle faster than it should. I mentioned the stumps, the stacked bark, even the jacket, though I still thought maybe I'd accidentally packed it without realizing. I snapped a few photos on my phone too, mostly of the clearing and the lookout tower. I didn't realize until later that none of the photos from that day would save. Every file was marked as corrupt. No explanation, just empty thumbnails. That evening, I found a new appreciation for the cabin. As old as it was, there was a charm to it. The stone hearth, though long dead, still held the smell of smoke. The corners of the room were webbed and dusty, but they made the place feel lived in, like it had history. I made another small dinner on my burner, dehydrated chili mac, and sat inside, propped up with my sleeping bag around my shoulders, watching the trees sway ever so slightly through the remaining unboarded window. When dusk settled in, I lit a small candle stub I'd brought. The shadows from the flame flickered across the wood walls, making them seem to pulse like the cabin was breathing alongside me. There was comfort in the routine: dinner, candlelight, writing, sleep. Even the stillness didn't feel as heavy that night. It was like I'd adapted to it, or maybe accepted it. There's something about being alone in nature for a few days that rewires your brain. The quiet starts to feel like a friend, like a blanket. I told myself that's all it was. I was adjusting, growing comfortable. Still, when I turned in for the night, I kept my pocket knife by my side. Not out of fear, just in case. A habit more than anything. The cabin creaked softly in the wind as I drifted off. For the first time since arriving, I slept through the night. The next morning, I noticed something odd. Not dramatic, just enough to put a twist in my gut. My journal was open on the desk. I hadn't left it that way. I always closed it and slid it back into my pack. But there it was, flipped to a page I hadn't written yet. A blank page. On it, in the corner, a small drawing had been penciled in.
A tree tall and narrow, a birch maybe, but it was wrong. There was something inside the trunk, dark marks that looked like a pair of eyes. I laughed at first. Nervous laughter. Told myself maybe I'd doodled it in half sleep or something.
Even though I don't draw. Especially not like that. I tore out the page, crumpled it, and tossed it into the cold fireplace. But my mood had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woods weren't just quiet anymore. They were listening, watching, waiting. And worse, maybe something had been here while I slept. Something that knew how to be silent too. I tried to push the whole journal thing out of my mind, but the unease lingered. That morning, I packed a day bag and decided to do a longer hike out toward the eastern ridge. There was a small summit marked on the old ranger map, and I figured a few hours out in the open would help clear my head. The trail was rough, overgrown in places, but I liked the challenge. Besides, it gave me something else to focus on. I kept telling myself that being alone in a strange place just makes you weirdly aware of stuff you'd never notice back home. Like how your mind plays tricks when all you've got to keep you company is your own thoughts. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It felt like the woods were paying attention. The ridge gave a beautiful view, rolling hills blanketed in red and gold, the tree line stretching as far as the eye could see. I sat on a flat rock and ate a protein bar, letting the sun warm my face. For a little while, I felt okay again, but when I turned back to head toward the shack, something made me stop. A noise, soft but clear. A single knock. Not close, maybe 100 yards to the north, but sharp, like someone rapping wood on wood. I froze, listened. Nothing else followed. No movement, no voice. Just one knock, and then the silence folded, back in like it had never been broken. I hurried back after that, tried to keep my pace normal, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. I knew there were no other hikers around. I hadn't seen a soul since I got off the gravel service road that led into this patch of woods. And still, I told myself it was a tree branch, or maybe a bird tapping something. I wanted to believe that. When I reached the cabin again, I stopped short on the porch. My boots were moved, just slightly. I'd left them straight by the door, side by side. Now one was turned outward, like someone had picked it up, examined it, and set it down wrong. I went inside slowly, hand on my knife. Everything looked normal, mostly. The cot was made, my backpack still zipped. But I noticed the cabinet, the one with the old maps, was open. I hadn't touched it since the first day. I didn't even remember leaving it unlocked. Inside, the maps were still there, but someone had drawn on one. A thick line in red ink traced a route I hadn't seen before. It curved off the existing trails right through Birch Hollow and ended in a circle drawn around a small grove near the stream. I took the map outside into the light, studied it closely. The ink was fresh, still tacky. I didn't own a red pen. That was the moment something clicked in my head. I wasn't alone out here, whether it was some backwoods squatter, a park creep, or something worse. I didn't know, but I wasn't alone. And whoever else was out here knew where I was, what I was doing, and how to move without leaving a trace. I should have packed up then, should have cut my losses. But part of me, stupid pride maybe, didn't want to get spooked out by something that could still be explained. I convinced myself that it might have been Curtis, the guy who rented me the place. Maybe he liked playing pranks on people. Maybe he came out here sometimes to check on things. It wasn't logical, but it was easier than thinking the alternative, that I was being stalked. That night, I barricaded the door with the cot. It was the only heavy piece of furniture that could realistically block entry. I also placed some gear, my mess kit, a metal cup, and my stove, near the window and entrance, just to make noise if someone tried coming in. It made me feel better, safer. I fell asleep at some point after midnight, not fully rested, but deep enough that dreams started to creep in. I dreamed I was lying on the forest floor, staring up at a birch tree whose branches curled downward, like fingers. The bark was peeling in wide strips, and underneath, the wood was black, not burnt, not diseased, just wrong. It pulsed, slow and steady, like something alive was inside. I heard footsteps behind me in the dream. Slow, deliberate. But I couldn't move, couldn't turn my head, couldn't even blink. Just lay there as the breathing started, deep, raspy inhales right behind my ear. When I woke up, it was still dark, and I couldn't hear a thing. Not even the wind. I turned my head slowly, hand inching toward my knife, heart pounding. The candle stub on the desk had been relit. It flickered quietly, low and yellow. I hadn't touched it that night, and I know for a fact it had burned out the night before. It was nothing short of impossible. My barricade was untouched, the gear traps hadn't moved, and still the candle burned. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed inside most of the next day. I told myself it was because I needed rest after the rough night, but really, I just didn't want to leave the cabin unattended. Something had changed, and whether it was a person, an animal, or something else, I needed to be alert. The woods no longer felt peaceful. They felt like a stage, and I had no idea who was watching. Every creak of the old boards made me flinch. Every shadow on the floor looked wrong. At some point, I convinced myself I was overreacting again, and I made tea just to have something normal to do. When I went to grab my thermos, I noticed the metal was ice cold. It hadn't been like that the day before. I keep it on a shelf, above the stove, not close to the window, not somewhere it could have gotten chilled on its own. But it was like it had been taken outside and placed back without a word. Trying to calm my nerves, I sat down at the desk to journal. I had every intention of writing a normal entry. Something simple. day count, weather, a note about the trees. But when I opened the notebook, the pages were no longer in the order I'd written them. Pages had been torn out and placed back in, rearranged. My handwriting was there, sure, but the most recent entry, which I hadn't written, read, "Don't
Listen to them.
They speak in silence." The words were written in thin, spidery letters that looked rushed, almost frantic. I closed the book and shoved it deep into my backpack, zipper pulled tight. I didn't want to see it again. It was then that I heard it scratching. Not on the walls, not from the roof, from under the floor, just beneath the planks beneath my boots, soft and steady, like long nails dragging across dry wood. I stood frozen, knife drawn again, though what I expected to do with it I couldn't say. The sound stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Then it started again, this time from the opposite side of the cabin, like something was circling beneath.
Me, I backed toward the door, but I didn't want to go outside, not into those woods.
Not when whatever was out there was clearly trying to lure me. I sat on the cot, still holding the knife, and waited for the sun to go down. I kept the stove unlit, didn't eat, didn't drink. I just sat there, trying to make sense of everything.
I started whispering to myself. Small, meaningless things, lyrics from old songs, my grocery list. I think I just needed to fill the silence.
Because the silence had started feeling active. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of something else, like a breath held just out of earshot. When night finally fell, I lit the candle again. Not because I wanted to, but because the darkness outside the cabin felt thick, like it was pressing against the windows. Around midnight, the scratching started again, but this time it was on the wall near the door. A slow, deliberate drag, followed by two sharp taps, like knuckles rapping against the wood. I didn't answer, I didn't move. My mind screamed to call someone, to run, to do anything, but I just sat there, too locked up by fear. After a few
minutes, the noise stopped, but then I heard something worse. Breathing. Not mine, not heavy or panting, just a long inhale, and then nothing.
I stayed up until the first sign of light crept through the boarded window. At dawn, I stepped outside, half expecting to see footprints, claw marks, something. But the ground was undisturbed. The frost still held my boot prints from yesterday, untouched. No drag marks, no scuffs, no sign that anything had ever been near the walls. I told myself I imagined it all, that I'd cracked from being alone too long. I packed my things. Not all of them, just the essentials. I left the stove, some food, the old maps. I needed to get out, even if it meant abandoning gear. I made it maybe a quarter mile down the trail before I saw the symbol, etched into a tree trunk with something sharp. A circle with 3 vertical slashes down the middle, like claw marks. I hadn't seen it before and I would have noticed. It was deep, fresh, still sticky with sap. Worse, it wasn't alone. I counted 5 more trees along the trail, all marked, all pointing inward, like they were funneling me back toward the cabin. I turned around, not because I wanted to, but because it felt like walking forward would only lead me into something worse. I thought maybe I could wait it out one more night and hike out in the morning using a different path. One without those trees, one where I could pick up the ridge again and follow the creek out. I stepped back into the cabin, heart pounding. That's when I saw what had been left on the desk. It was my missing jacket, folded, clean, and tucked inside the collar. Something small and pale, a human tooth. I stood frozen in the doorway, just staring at the desk. The jacket, my jacket, was laid out so neatly it made my skin crawl. I hadn't seen it since the first day, and now it looked freshly washed, almost pressed. But it wasn't the jacket that stopped me from breathing. It was the tooth. Small, yellowed, unmistakably human. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to be near it. For a long moment I just stood there trying to make the world make sense again, but it wouldn't. Something had been in the cabin again. Something that could move quietly, deliberately, and leave messages far clearer than any words. The tooth wasn't just a threat, it was proof. Something had seen me, taken my things, and now it was letting me know exactly what it was capable of. The need to get out hit me like a gut punch. I threw my pack together without even thinking. Food, flashlight, backup battery, my knife. I didn't care what I left behind. I wasn't going to wait until morning. Screw the marked trees. Screw the trail. I just needed to get anywhere else. But as I was stuffing the last of my things into the pack, something fell out of the side pocket. A photograph. An old, faded Polaroid I'd never seen before. My hand trembled as I picked it up. The image was of the shack, my shack. The same angle as the front door, same slope of the roof, same boarded window. Only in the photo, someone was standing in the doorway. Or rather, something. The figure was tall and impossibly thin, with arms that reached too far past the knees. The head was tilted, not in a natural way, but like it had been hung there. No face, just a blank smear where features should have been. But the worst part, the part that still haunts me even now, was the time stamp. Someone had scratched the date into the white bottom of the photo. Oct. 17, the day before I arrived. I dropped the photo and backed away. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened. I ran to the door and nearly wrenched it off its hinges trying to open it. I didn't stop to think about which direction I was going. I just ran past the birches, past the ridge trail, deeper into the woods where there were no markings, no signs, no warnings. I ran until my legs ached and my breath burned in my chest. And then I stopped because I saw something that made my blood run cold. A second cabin, smaller, half sunken into the ground like it had been swallowed. I hadn't seen it on any map, old or new. I shouldn't have seen it at all. The roof was mostly gone and the door was nothing but a frame. I stepped closer against every screaming instinct in my body. Inside there was barely anything, just a rotted cot, a broken lantern, and a single notebook sitting in the middle of the floor. I picked it up. The cover was damp, the pages warped. The first few entries were written in frantic, jagged handwriting, all first-person accounts, just like mine. The author described arriving in Birch Hollow, renting the shack, noticing the silence, the jacket going missing, the journal being tampered with, all of it, the exact same events, word for word, and then the tone shifted. Pages went missing, torn out. The writing grew unstable. One line was scrawled over and over again across 2 full pages. It's inside the trees, it's inside the trees, it's inside the trees. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the first. This thing, whatever it was, had done this before. Maybe many times. Maybe it lured people in through shady rentals, through rumors of forgotten cabins. It waited until they were isolated, slowly took things, left signs, broke them down piece by piece until the woods swallowed them up. This wasn't random. It was a pattern. I dropped the notebook and stepped back, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. As I turned to leave, I noticed something etched into the wooden frame of the ruined door. Just a name. Curtis. I didn't know what to do with that. It could have been someone else. It could have been the same guy who gave me the key. I didn't want to believe it was the same Curtis, but the truth had started to rot inside me. There was no safety anymore, not even in the explanation. Everything was part of the trap. The key, the map, the cabin rental, all of it. I made my way back to the shack in a daze, half hoping it would be gone when I returned. But it wasn't. It was still there, quiet and waiting, like it had never moved. But when I stepped inside, something else had changed. The cabinet was open again, and this time there was no map inside, just dozens of small scraps of birch bark. Each had a name written on it in the same spidery hand. Some names were scratched out, some weren't. One of them was mine. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I kept the lantern, my backup one, the one I knew I hadn't brought out in days, burning at my side. I sat with my back to the wall, knife on my lap, eyes fixed on the door. The birch bark name tags were still in the cabinet, untouched since I'd found them, and mine still sat right at the front of the stack. I kept glancing at it like it might change, or vanish, or suddenly be crossed out. I couldn't decide which would be worse. Outside, the woods were completely silent again. No wind, no animals, just that awful, blank quiet that felt too intentional. I whispered to myself to stay calm, but the words barely meant anything anymore. I was running out of ways to convince myself I hadn't walked into something far beyond my understanding.
Sometime around 2 or 3 a.m., the light flickered and went out. Not slowly, not like a battery dying. 1 second it was on and the next it was gone, like someone had blown it out. I scrambled for my flashlight and clicked it on, heart hammering, sweat slicking the back of my neck despite the cold.
I swung the beam across the room. Nothing, just shadows dancing across wooden walls and dust catching in the beam. But then I heard the sound again, the scratching. Only this time, it wasn't outside, it wasn't under the floor, it was from the ceiling. The noise started directly above me, then crept to the far corner, then back again, like something was crawling along the roof, dragging nails or claws across the old wood. My flashlight caught dust raining down from the ceiling boards. Something was up there. I didn't wait to find out what. I grabbed my pack and bolted out the front door into the night, not even bothering to close it behind me. The cold slapped me in the face, but I didn't stop running until I'd put at least 100 yards between me and the shack. That's when I saw the light, faint, off to the left, deeper into the woods. Not a flashlight, not a lantern. It was a dull, steady glow, flickering slightly like a fire. For a moment I thought it might be help, another camper, anything human. I followed it, barely thinking, heart racing. But as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. The light was coming from the inside of a tree. A birch tree, wide at the base, hollowed out and split open like a wound. And inside, something pulsed. The same yellow-orange glow I'd seen from the candle. But it wasn't fire. It was too smooth, too steady, like the tree was breathing light. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, hit the ground hard. As I scrambled to my feet, I saw movement, not far away, between the trunks. Tall, slender, watching. It didn't move like a person, it moved like it didn't need to. It just stood there, and I could feel its attention. The silence around it was suffocating. No birds, no bugs, not even the rustle of leaves, just the sound of my heartbeat thudding against my eardrums.
I turned and ran. I didn't care where I ended up, I just ran.
Eventually I found myself on the gravel service road, where I'd started days earlier. I don't remember how I got there. It's like my brain blocked everything out between the tree and that road. 1 minute I was in the woods, and the next I was stumbling into the light of dawn, falling to my knees in front of a trail marker I vaguely recognized. I followed the road back to my car in a half-fugue, not stopping to breathe until I was inside, engine running, doors locked. I didn't look back. I didn't even put the car in park until I was halfway to the nearest town. At the ranger station, I tried to explain what had happened. I told the officer behind the desk that I'd been in a rented cabin up past Birch Hollow, that someone had been stalking me out there. I didn't mention the tree, or the light, or the name etched in the ruined doorframe. But even so, he just stared at me blankly, then shook his head, said there were no sanctioned cabins up there, said the area had been closed off for years due to erosion. When I asked about Curtis, he just raised an eyebrow. No one by that name works with the Forest Service, never has. I asked if they could send someone to check it out. He said they could send a deputy if I could give a specific location. I gave him the GPS pin Curtis had sent me. The ranger typed it in, squinted at the screen, and then frowned. "That's not even on a mapped trail," he said. "You sure you weren't somewhere else?" When I insisted, he told me I was welcome to file a report, but without proof or coordinates that matched a real location, there wasn't much they could do. I didn't argue, I just left. I checked into the first motel I found, collapsed onto the bed, and slept for 16 hours straight. When I woke up, I checked my phone. The photos from the trip, every single one, were gone. Not deleted, corrupted. The journal? Gone too. I'd had it in my pack, but it wasn't there anymore. No Polaroid, no birch bark, no map. It was like the woods had taken everything back. I've tried to move on. It's been almost a year now since Birch Hollow, and in the daylight, in
normal places, it almost feels like it didn't happen. I've got a new job closer to town. I sold most of my hiking gear. I haven't set foot in the woods since.
friends ask why I don't go camping anymore, and I just laugh it off. Tell them I had a bad trip, got sick, lost a pack. I don't tell them about the breathing tree, or the figure in the photo, or the tooth. Some things you don't say out
loud because you're not sure if you believe them again once they're spoken. Looking back though, there's so much I missed.
The signs were all there. The weird posting. The key with no return address. The way the woods never made a sound. I should have listened to the way my gut twisted when I saw those names scratched onto birch bark. I should have known better when I found my gear placed just so, but I wanted the quiet, I wanted to be alone. That's the real truth of it, and whatever's out there, it knows how to wait for people like me. People who need the silence. I never filed the full report. I never pressed the issue. Part of me was afraid they'd dig into it and find nothing, or worse, find something I couldn't explain away. I figured if I kept my head down, if I stayed away from that place, I'd be safe. But 2 weeks ago, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name printed in small block letters on the front. Inside was a piece of folded birch bark, one of the thin sheets just like the ones in the cabinet. And on it, in the same scratchy, crooked handwriting, was one word. Again. No postmark, no tracking number, just the bark, the envelope, and that word. I burned it in the sink, but the smell stuck around, this bitter, cold scent that reminded me of the cabin, of the trees. I started keeping a knife by my bed again, just in case. I stopped sleeping with the windows open. Sometimes I think I hear something tapping at the wall late at night, always once, sometimes twice, never more. I don't know what it is, I don't know what it wants, but I know it hasn't forgotten me. And now, I don't think it ever will. Whatever followed me out of Birch Hollow, whatever I saw in those woods, it's not gone, it's just quiet. Waiting, and sometimes, late at night, when the house is completely still, I hold my breath, just to listen, because it's in the
silence where it starts. I think the silence is getting louder again.
When the call came, I was living out of my truck. The world had collapsed in ways I hadn't seen coming. One bad job after another, a breakup I hadn't recovered from, and a series of half-hearted YouTube videos that barely paid for gas. So, when I got the voicemail from a lawyer's office in Tacoma saying I'd inherited a property from an uncle I'd never met, I didn't feel lucky. I felt suspicious. I almost didn't call back. But curiosity is a stubborn itch, and by the time I pulled into a diner parking lot with one bar of reception, I'd already convinced myself I had nothing to lose. The estate consisted of a single cabin in the Olympic Peninsula, on the edge of forest land so dense it barely registered on Google Maps. The lawyer didn't have much to offer in the way of details, just coordinates, an old mailing address, and a note in the case file that read, "No next of kin. Property never sold. He wanted it kept in the family." It sounded like the beginning of a joke. I didn't even remember my uncle. Apparently his name was Roger Dantley, my mum's half-brother, some Vietnam vet who dropped off the face of the earth in the 90s. No one had heard from him in decades. Until now. I signed the papers 2 days later. The deed was clean, the taxes paid off, and the lawyer practically shoved the keys into my hands. He left a message for you, he
Added as I stood up. It's written in the back of the journal we found. That stopped me. Journal?
He slid over a beat-up composition notebook, the kind you'd find in a school locker. It's mostly blank, but the last page is addressed to you. I opened it in my car. Most of the pages were filled with looping, slanted handwriting that looked more like weather reports than journal entries, dates, temperatures, changes in rainfall. But at the very end, on the inside back cover, there were just 4 words in thick black pen. Don't let it in. I should have turned around then. I should have driven away. But instead, I put the key in the ignition and started toward the forest, telling myself it was just a figure of speech, just some old man's paranoia. Looking back, though, that was the moment it began. The road leading up to the cabin didn't look like it had been driven in years. My tires crunched over moss and stones, every bump jarring through the frame, like the truck was resisting the destination. Tall firs and towering cedars pressed close from both sides, blocking out the late afternoon sun. It was like driving into a different century. The GPS gave up half a mile back. I followed the coordinates the old-fashioned way, watching the compass needle jitter as if it were nervous too. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked into a hollow where the trees broke just wide enough to allow for a sagging porch and a crooked stone chimney. The roof was draped in moss like a sleeping creature. One of the windows had been boarded, the others were streaked with years of dirt. And yet there was no dust on the doorknob when I reached for it. It turned with a clean click. Inside smelled like cedar and cold earth. The interior was surprisingly intact. No graffiti, no raccoons nesting in the loft. Just an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. The fireplace was stacked with dry wood. The furniture, though covered in sheets, was solid and unbroken. I pulled one off and sent a bloom of dust into the air. The place felt paused, not abandoned, like someone had just stepped out and forgotten to come back. In the kitchen, I found another journal. This one, older, leather-bound, its pages yellowed and fragile. Unlike the other, this one was full. Notes written in cramped handwriting detailing the weather, local animal tracks and references to something only called the route. At first, I thought it meant a tree or maybe a trail marker. But the way it was described, moved last night, still humming beneath the floor. Fed again, made it feel more like something alive. I spent that first night on the couch, sleeping in my coat, the axe close at hand. The silence was too thick. Every creak of the cabin felt rehearsed, like the house was breathing slow and careful. Around midnight, I thought I heard something outside, like moss being pulled from a stone. I didn't check. I told myself it was a deer, maybe an owl shifting on the roof. But in the morning, the footprints in the moss weren't mine, and they led directly to the cabin door. The second morning, I woke up to the fireplace burning on its own. I hadn't lit it. I hadn't even brought in matches, and yet the flames crackled steadily as if they'd been going all night. The couch cushions were damp, not from rain or dew, but from the moss, fresh green moss that had spread in small patches across the floorboards near the hearth. I bent down to touch it, and it felt warm. Not from the fire, from something underneath. I tried to brush it off, clean it away, but it clung to the wood like it had grown there overnight. It hadn't been there the day before. That much I knew. When I looked out the window, I noticed the fog hadn't lifted, not even a little. The trees beyond the clearing looked more like shadows than trunks, and I couldn't tell what time it was. My phone still had no signal. My watch had stopped ticking at 4:12 a.m. and wouldn't restart even after a battery change. That evening, I opened one of the trunks in the loft, thinking I'd look for spare candles or tools. Instead, I found old cassette tapes labeled with dates going back to 1976. Most were unmarked, except for strange scrawlings on the labels. Feeding. Growth. Too deep. Not me. The handwriting didn't match the journals. I didn't have a tape player, so I couldn't listen. I wish I never had the chance. By the third night, the moss had reached the kitchen. It wasn't just growing, it was pulsing, faintly, like a
Heartbeat. And when I stepped over it, the lights flickered. The bulb in the ceiling fan blew out completely, raining bits of glass onto the counter.
I slept with the axe on my chest, and every time I closed my eyes, I swore I heard breathing, not outside, not above me, beneath. By the fourth day, I stopped pretending things were normal. I gave up on trying to fix the watch or sweep away the moss, or rationalize the low hum that started under the floorboards. Instead, I went back into the trunk and pulled out every journal, every map, every scrap of writing I could find. I laid them across the table and tried to piece together who Roger Dantley had been and what he'd been doing out here. The earliest entries talked about gardening and rainfall and local wildlife. But after 1982, everything shifted. Roger started referring to the heart, sometimes called Moss Heart, as if it were both a place and a thing. He wrote about hearing whispers through the roots, about black veins that grew behind the walls, and about sacrifices, though he never said what kind. One passage from 1987 chilled me. It sleeps until fed. The breath of cedar wakes it. My blood was not enough. I searched the cabin more thoroughly, lifting floorboards and crawling into the crawl space beneath. I found an old radio setup, military grade, rusted to hell but still wired into something that hummed softly, even when unplugged. Under the floor there were etchings, symbols burned into the wood like sigils. The moss hadn't grown there, it avoided them. That scared me more than anything else. That night I listened to one of the cassette tapes. I'd driven into town earlier that day and bought a portable player. I had to park 2 miles out just to get reception, and I didn't dare bring the player back into the cabin. I listened from the truck. The first minute was static. Then came a sound I'll never forget, a deep groaning, like wind through a tunnel, followed by a man's voice. Still hungry? not full yet, growing roots.
Through me and silence.
I didn't sleep at all that night. When I returned to the cabin in the morning, moss had grown across the entire porch, crawling up the door like ivy. Something had changed, something new. I was trying to understand it. The fifth night, I woke to find my axe missing. I hadn't moved it. It was always by the couch. I searched the entire cabin, my heart pounding, sweat slick on my neck even in the cold. I found it leaning against the bedroom door, blade down, handle upright, like it had been placed there to keep something in. The moss was no longer pulsing, it was crawling. Slowly, steadily, it had begun to spread up the walls. I watched it for hours, and I swear I saw it twitch like it was sensing the air, testing the room. The sound under the floor had changed too, louder, more rhythmic, not quite a heartbeat, more like a breath, like the house was inhaling and exhaling, slower than any human ever could. I went to burn the tapes. I piled them in the fireplace and
Lit them with a match. The flames sputtered like they didn't want to catch. Then I heard the voice again, not from the player, from inside the walls. Still hungry? That's when it hit me. This wasn't about Roger. This wasn't just
some cursed cabin or leftover trauma. This was about me. The cabin had watched him, used him, and now it was watching me. That night, the moss reached the bedroom. It bloomed on the headboard, crept across the sheets. I slept outside on the porch wrapped in a blanket. Even then, I could hear it inside, growing, shifting, waiting. The next morning, the cabin door was open. I know I'd locked it. Something wanted me back in. It didn't like being ignored. I made a plan. I marked every symbol on the floor and copied them into a notebook. I carved matching sigils into cedar wood and placed them at the four corners of the cabin, hoping to recreate some kind of barrier. The journals hinted at a containment method, a way to lull the thing to sleep. I was grasping at folklore, but I didn't care. Anything was better than just waiting. I stayed up through the night, circling the cabin with salt and ash, whispering every prayer I could remember from childhood. The moss recoiled at first, actually pulled back, but then surged forward as if angry. My breath fogged in the air despite the fire roaring behind me. I shouted, screamed, threatened the walls, begged for it to leave. And then everything stopped. The sound, the pulsing, the breathing, it all went silent. For a moment I thought it had worked. I slumped to the floor, dizzy with hope. But then I noticed something new. Not moss, not symbols. Roots. Thick, gnarled roots had pushed through the baseboards and now coiled up the walls. They moved, slowly, rhythmically, like veins pushing sap instead of blood. The floor vibrated. I ran outside, started the truck, and didn't stop until I hit the highway. I slept in a rest stop 60 miles away, light on all night, staring at the tree line. I was done. Or so I thought. 2 weeks later, back in Tacoma, I started seeing moss. Not outside. Inside. In my apartment bathroom.
on the windowsill of my truck. It grew fast. Too fast. I moved again. Still followed.
I threw away everything from the cabin. Notes, journals, even my clothes. But the moss still appeared. Always damp, always warm, always spreading. 3 days ago, I woke up with dirt under my nails. I hadn't been outside. My feet were muddy, my shirt torn. I checked the dash cam in my truck. At 2:13 a.m. the engine started.
I wasn't at the wheel. But something was. I could hear humming in the cabin's clearing, the same note over and over, and then my voice. It's still hungry. I'll feed it soon. I don't remember saying that, I don't.
Remember driving? But last night, I woke up in my truck again, parked on the forest road, moss on the dashboard, keys in the ignition, my old boots muddy in the back seat, and the cabin barely visible through the trees, its windows glowing softly, waiting for me. The journal's last line was right. I didn't let it in. It let me out.